Let me ask you something that no one else dares to. How long have you been getting ready to start? Be honest. How many plans, outlines, mind maps, books, YouTube videos, online courses, productivity tools, and journal entries have you accumulated? All in the name of preparation. And yet, the thing you say you want, the project, the business, the transformation, is still sitting untouched, like an unopened gift you keep admiring, but never dare to unwrap. You probably tell yourself you're being responsible, that you're just not ready yet, that you're gathering knowledge, waiting for the right time, or making sure you'll do it properly. But here's the truth no one tells you. That voice in your head, the one convincing you to wait, isn't being careful. It's being protective, and not in a good way. It's your brain running an ancient script, hardwired to keep you safe, not successful. And in the modern world, that safety mechanism has become your invisible prison. You see, the real problem is not that you don't know what to do. You already know. Deep down, you've known for months, maybe years. You know what needs to be done, but you keep waiting to feel like doing it, to feel confident, motivated, clear, to feel ready. And that's where your entire life is getting hijacked, because that feeling, it's never coming. Mel Robbins, someone who dragged herself out of depression and financial collapse using one brutally simple insight, puts it plainly: you are never going to feel like it. You are never going to wake up one day suddenly filled with unstoppable motivation and clarity. It is a fairy tale. That is the lie that's keeping you stuck. Because here's how the brain works. Every time you feel an impulse to change, to move, to start, you get about 5 seconds before your mind kills it. Literally. Within that window, your brain will flood you with fear, hesitation, rationalizations. What if I will? Maybe tomorrow. Let me just check one more thing first. Sound familiar? It's not laziness. It's not lack of willpower. It's neuroscience. And the cost of not knowing this? Years of your life lost in the space between knowing and doing. A slow death by hesitation. So I'm not here to give you more inspiration. You don't need more reasons. You already have them. I'm here to tell you the truth. If you don't act in the first 5 seconds after the impulse hits, you won't act at all. That's how fast your brain builds the cage. That's how fast your dream dies. And that's where this conversation begins. Not with comfort, but with truth. Unfiltered, unromantic, and non-negotiable. You're not stuck because you're not ready. You're stuck because you're waiting to feel ready. And that day, it's never coming. Let's go deeper. Because the reason you're stuck runs much deeper than procrastination or lack of willpower. It's biological. Your own brain, the thing you rely on for logic, vision, intelligence, is, ironically, the main force keeping you paralyzed. And if you don't understand how, you'll keep mistaking self-sabotage for being cautious. Here's the brutal truth. Your brain does not give a damn about your dreams. It doesn't care about your ambitions, your purpose, your goals, or the legacy you want to leave behind. It has one job, refined over millions of years: keep you alive, not thriving, not fulfilled, just alive. And to do that, it is obsessed with one thing: avoiding risk. Every time you think about starting something that feels uncertain, difficult, or different, whether it's launching a business, moving to another city, ending a toxic relationship, or simply making a phone call you've been avoiding, your brain immediately categorizes it as a threat. Not dangerous, but because it is unknown. And to your survival-oriented brain, unfamiliar, unsafe. That's why your body tenses up. That's why your stomach twists. That's why you feel that sudden, invisible weight pressing down on your chest every time you think about taking action. It's not reality. It's not intuition. It's fear. And it's being manufactured by your own nervous system in real time. This is not a bug. It's a feature. It's the same mechanism that kept your ancestors from walking into the dark cave, eating the strange berry, or confronting the predator alone. But now, that same ancient mechanism is getting triggered when you try to post your first video, speak up in a meeting, or send your manuscript to a publisher. Your brain still thinks you might die from social rejection or failure. It doesn't realize you're not in the jungle anymore. You're in your apartment, with Wi-Fi, trying to grow. And here's where it gets worse. The smarter you are, the more articulate, analytical, and self-aware, the better your brain is at manufacturing reasonable excuses that sound wise. You don't call it fear. You call it timing. You call it being strategic. You say things like, I'm just waiting for the right moment. I need to finish this one thing first. I'll start after the holidays. I just need a little more research. That's fear in a suit and tie. It wears the costume of logic. But underneath, it's the same terrified instinct screaming, don't move, don't risk, stay where it's safe. And every time you listen to it, you reinforce the neural loop that says, hesitation as protection, planning as progress, inaction as safety. But here's the paradox. In today's world, your comfort zone is not your safe zone. It's your death zone. Not a quick death, a slow one. The kind that eats your confidence, numbs your spirit, and turns years into regrets. And unless you interrupt this mechanism, unless you learn how to override this internal alarm system, you'll never move. You'll keep building castles in your mind and graves under your potential. So now the question is, how do you interrupt this cycle? How do you override a brain that was built to betray your growth? The answer is shockingly simple. In fact, it only takes 5 seconds, and that's exactly what we'll explore next. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Here's a truth that will disturb you, and it should. You are waiting for something that is never going to happen. You think that one day you'll wake up and suddenly feel like you'll feel energized, confident, certain, like all the stars will align, and you'll finally start writing the book, building the brand, fixing the relationship, quitting the job. But here's what no one ever told you. That feeling, the one you're waiting for, it's a lie. You won't feel ready. Not now, not later, not ever. We've been sold a fantasy. That motivation is this magical, spontaneous force that shows up and carries us across the finish line. That one day we'll just feel different. And that moment will be so powerful, we'll never look back. Bullshit. As Mel Robbins said, you are never going to feel like it. Motivation is not a prerequisite to action. It's a result of action. You don't feel motivated and then act. You act, and then, and only then, the motivation follows. This isn't theory. This is biology. Your brain is a survival machine, not a success engine. When you think about doing something difficult or uncertain, your amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for fear, lights up. The job of the amygdala is to keep you away from pain, uncertainty, and discomfort. So it floods your system with hesitation, doubt, and 100 reasons to wait. You call this thinking. It's not thinking. It's fear pretending to be logic. This is why people spend decades preparing but never starting. This is why people with PhDs, coaches, mentors, full plans, and endless resources stay stuck for years, because they're still waiting for a feeling that will never arrive. They're addicted to the illusion that readiness comes before action. Let me break it to you. Readiness is a myth. Confidence is a myth. Clarity is a myth. These are all things you earn on the journey, not things you begin with. Think about it. Did you feel ready the first time you had a tough conversation, made a leap of faith, started something meaningful? No. Terrified, but you did it anyway. And then the courage came, then the pride came, then the energy to keep going appeared. That's how the system works. The longer you wait to feel ready, The more you train your brain to believe that action requires emotion, that you have to want to do something before you do it. And every time you obey that lie, it gets stronger. Every day you hesitate, hesitation becomes more familiar, more natural, more comfortable, until one day you look back at a life full of almosts, maybes, and someday. So what do the people who break through do differently? They act without permission from their feelings. They don't wait to want to move. They move, despite not wanting to. And in doing so, they retrain their brain to stop asking for comfort before taking action. This is the turning point. This is where the game changes. When you realize that you don't need to feel like it. You don't need permission from your mind. You don't need to be motivated, inspired, or confident. You need to act. Now, before the hesitation takes hold. And there is a tool, a deceptively simple, science-backed tool, that gives you the power to do just that. You'll learn it in the next part. And once you do, you'll never see the space between intention and action the same way again. Now that you understand why you're stuck, not because you're lazy, but because your brain is doing exactly what it was built to do, it's time to break the cycle. And the tool you're about to learn is so simple, it will sound ridiculous at first. You might even roll your eyes. But once you understand what it does, neurologically and behaviorally, you'll see why it's one of the most powerful psychological mechanisms ever discovered by accident. It's called the 5-second rule. And here's how it works. The moment you have an instinct, a genuine urge to act on something meaningful, aligned with your goals, your growth, your truth, you count. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. And you move, physically, immediately, before your brain has time to kill it. You don't wait, you don't negotiate, you don't debate, you don't rationalize, you act. That's it. This 5-second window is everything. Because if you don't move within it, the brain's survival system activates. It starts doing what it always does, launching mental narratives, resistance, excuses, fears, hesitations. And once those stories begin, you're done. You're back in the cage. So why does counting backward, something that sounds like a silly trick, actually work? Because it interrupts the default neural pathway of overthinking and activates a different part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex. This is the area responsible for decision-making, planning, and action. By counting down, not up, you create a pattern interrupt. You override the fear center, amygdala, and engage the executive center. Your attention shifts, your physiology changes, and most importantly, your body moves. Mel Robbins didn't invent this rule in a lab. She discovered it in crisis, depressed, broke, drinking too much, hitting snooze every morning while her life fell apart. She saw a rocket launch on TV and said, "Tomorrow, I'm launching myself out of bed like that. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And she did. That one moment sparked a complete transformation, financially, emotionally, professionally. Since then, this rule has been tested by thousands. People used it to leave abusive relationships, to quit toxic jobs, to speak up in meetings, to finally take the first terrifying step toward who they were meant to be. And it works because it cuts through the noise. It doesn't require motivation, confidence, or readiness. It just requires 5 seconds of courage and the willingness to move before your brain has to stop you. Here's the deeper truth. The hardest part is never the task itself. It's starting, opening the laptop, saying the first words, stepping outside, making the call. That micro moment of hesitation is where your life is decided, again and again, every single day. And when you win that moment, when you move before your fear can speak, you start to build something far more powerful than discipline. You build trust in yourself. You begin to prove, in real time, that you can act despite fear, that you can take the wheel from your instincts, that you are not at the mercy of your emotions. That's how you rebuild confidence. That's how momentum is born. Not from motivation, but from motion. And once you realize that, you understand something most people never do. Change doesn't happen in a year. It happens in 5 seconds. But now you might be asking, what happens after you move? What if it still feels hard? What if discomfort kicks in and you want to run back? That's the next battle. And in the next part, we'll explore the modern prison that makes sure most people never leave that cage, even after they start. It's called the comfort zone, and it's killing you slowly. Let's talk about the place you keep running back to, the one that feels safe, familiar, controllable. The place where nothing threatens you, but also nothing changes. It's your comfort zone. But here's the part no one tells you. That comfort, it comes at a price. And you're paying for it with your life. You weren't born stuck. You trained yourself to be. Every time you hesitated and chose safety over movement, you laid a brick. Every time you said, not today, maybe later, or what if it doesn't work, you laid another. And now you live inside a structure built entirely from your own fear. And it doesn't look like a prison. That's the genius of it. It looks like responsibility, like control, like being realistic. You decorate it with good intentions, a job that's not so bad, a routine that feels comfortable, a plan that keeps getting pushed to next month. But behind the calm is a quiet kind of despair, the kind that whispers, I know I was meant for more than this. Here's the dark truth. Your comfort zone is not neutral. It is not a passive space where nothing happens. It is an active force of decay. Every day you stay there, you shrink. Your confidence erodes. Your self-trust dissolves. Your dreams die, not in explosions, but in slow, forgettable silence. The longer you stay comfortable, the more your identity locks around the version of you who doesn't move. You start believing you're someone who just isn't the kind of person who, finish the sentence, takes risks, starts businesses, puts themselves out there, changes careers, tells the truth, lives fully. But none of that is true. It's just repetition. You've simply practiced comfort more than you've practiced courage. Because here's what happens when you step out of that zone: discomfort. And let's be honest, most people treat discomfort like a threat. But discomfort isn't a warning, it's a signal. Growth never feels while it's happening. It feels like fear, resistance, pain, uncertainty. It feels wrong because it's unfamiliar. But unfamiliar is not unsafe, it's just unused territory. Your comfort zone might be keeping you safe from failure, rejection, judgment. But it's also keeping you safe from success, meaning, and the version of yourself you haven't even met yet. It's a cocoon that was never meant to become a coffin. And here's the paradox. The more you leave the comfort zone, the larger it gets. What once felt terrifying becomes normal. What used to drain you begins to excite you. And what you once feared, you now own. Because when you build evidence that you can survive discomfort, your entire identity shifts. You stop asking, can I do this? And you start asking, what else am I capable of? But how do you start expanding that zone without overwhelming yourself? What if the leap feels too big? What if you freeze every time you try? Then you start small, micro, atomic. You don't need to break down the entire wall today. You just need to crack it. And that's exactly what we'll explore next. Because if the comfort zone is the prison, then micro movements are the escape plan. And in the next part, we'll dissect the psychology of momentum and how one small act can change everything. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. By now, you understand the stakes. You know your brain is wired to protect, not progress. You know motivation is unreliable. You know your comfort zone is more like a padded cell, disguised as safety. But knowledge isn't enough. What matters now is movement, and not massive, dramatic movement. That's another myth that keeps people frozen, thinking they need to overhaul their entire life in one perfect leap. Forget the leap. What you need is a step, a microscopic, seemingly insignificant step. Because that's where momentum is born, not in revolution, but in motion, in the next action, not the best one, not the perfect one, just the next. This is where most people get it wrong. They confuse progress with perfection. They think they have to feel ready to write the whole book, launch the entire brand, run the marathon. And because that feels impossible, they do nothing. But here's what the people who actually do the thing understand. Tiny actions compound. Motion creates emotion. Energy follows execution. You don't need to write the book today. You need to open the document. You don't need to go to the gym and crush a full workout. You need to put on your shoes. You don't need to have the whole business plan. You need to send one email. That's it. That's the game. Because here's what happens when you start. You generate evidence. Evidence that you are not powerless, that you can act, that you do have control. And that evidence, even if it comes from a 30-second action, starts to dismantle the story your brain has been clinging to for years. That you're not ready, not good enough, not built for this. Mel Robbins calls this activation energy. The idea that movement itself is the fuel. It's not just symbolic. There's real neuroscience behind it. When you move your body, physically, you engage the prefrontal cortex, shifting focus away from the emotions that generate fear and hesitation. In other words, motion breaks the cycle of overthinking. This is why the 5-second rule works. It's not about getting the whole job done. It's about beating the window where your brain will kill the impulse. Once you take that first step, no matter how small, momentum takes over. And resistance? It starts to dissolve. The biggest myth in personal growth is that you need to feel better before you start. But the truth is, you start to feel better. Action first, emotion follows. And you want to know the craziest part? That tiny moment, the one where you moved instead of waiting, becomes a victory. One that your brain remembers. You reinforce the identity of someone who moves, someone who acts, someone who doesn't wait to feel like it. That shift in identity is how transformation begins. One micro win at a time. But there's something and more powerful that happens when you build momentum. You begin to reclaim your agency. You stop seeing yourself as a passive victim of hesitation and start becoming the kind of person who decides, who moves, who initiates. And from that place, everything becomes possible. So let's take this even further, because it's not just about tasks. This isn't just for your to-do list. At some point, this stops being about productivity. This stops being about routines or getting things done. This becomes about who you are. Because the truth is, every time you hesitate, every time you surrender to fear, every time you wait for motivation, you are making a decision. And those decisions, they shape your identity more than you realize. You think you're stuck because you haven't made the big decisions yet. To leave the job, start the business, end the relationship, begin the chapter. But that's not true. You're stuck because of the small decisions you make every single day. The ones that seem insignificant. The ones where you could have moved but didn't. The decision to snooze, to scroll, to delay, to wait. That version of you, the one you dream about becoming, they're not built through fantasy. They're built through action. Through one 5-second moment at a time. One decision to move instead of freeze. One decision to lean in instead of back away. One decision to interrupt the story your fear keeps replaying in your head. That is the power of this rule. It's not just about doing. It's about becoming. Every time you count 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and move, you're not just taking action. You're voting for a new identity. You're showing your brain, I don't need to feel like it. I decide what happens next. And that, right there, is freedom. The kind of freedom most people never experience because they've spent their lives outsourcing their future to their feelings. But you don't have to. You can reclaim control, not all at once, but in micro moments of defiance, in seconds of courage, in tiny, irreversible decisions that say, I will not live in hesitation anymore. And here's what you must remember. You're not broken. You're not lazy. You're not unmotivated. You've just been waiting for a feeling that was never designed to come. Now you know better. So here's your challenge. Comment below with the one thing you've been putting off. The one move you know you need to make. Not someday, not next week. Now. Down. Declare it. Own it. Because once it's real, once it's out of your head, you've already begun. And don't stop here. If this hit you, if it exposed something in you, keep watching. The next video is a part of the process. You've made it this far. Don't let the momentum die now. I'll see you there.
Whoa. What's that? I just built a budgeting app in Base 44. Guys.
Nobody wakes up one morning and waste their life. It happens in inches. One skipped workout that becomes a skipped month. One postponed project that becomes a postponed year. One morning of scrolling instead of creating that becomes 10,000 mornings of scrolling instead of creating. And the strangest part is that it never feels like decay while it's happening. It feels like rest, like ability, like being kind to yourself. That's what makes it so perfectly engineered to destroy you. It wears the disguise of something reasonable. Meanwhile, there are people who seem to operate on a completely different operating system. Not more talented. Not genetically gifted with discipline. Just running different software. And the gap between those two groups comes down to 7 specific habits that don't just build momentum. They create a form of psychological addiction so powerful that going back to the old life starts to feel physically impossible. Here's what most people get wrong about habits. They think habits are about repetition. Do something 21 days in a row, and boom, you're transformed. That number, by the way, comes from a plastic surgeon in the 1960s who noticed patients took about 3 weeks to get used to their new face. Somehow, that became the gold standard for habit formation. A study out of University College London actually tracked how long it takes for a behavior to become automatic. The real number? 66 days on average. Some habits took over 250 days. So, right out of the gate, the entire popular model of habit building is based on a misquoted cosmetic surgeon from 6 decades ago. That's what the self-improvement industry is built on. But here's the thing about habits that actually stick. The kind that rewire your identity so deeply that going back to your old life feels physically uncomfortable. They don't work through repetition alone. They work through addiction. Not the destructive kind, the kind that Miyamoto Musashi described when he wrote about the way, the path that once walked becomes impossible to abandon. The kind that makes a monk wake up at 4 in the morning, not because an alarm forces him to, but because sleeping past 4 feels like betrayal. That kind of addiction to growth, to change, to becoming something more than yesterday's version of yourself. And it starts with 7 very specific habits that most people either ignore entirely or execute so badly they might as well not bother. The first habit sounds almost offensively simple, and that's exactly why it works. Wake up before the world tells you what to think. Not just early, before input, before your phone. Before news, notifications, emails, texts, social media, before any external voice enters your head and starts dictating your emotional state for the day. A A researcher at the University of California, Irvine found that it takes an average of 23 minutes and 15 seconds to fully regain focus after a single interruption. 23 minutes. And most people pick up their phone within 3 minutes of opening their eyes, which means before their feet even hit the floor, they've already handed the steering wheel of their mind to someone else's agenda. Now, here's the thing about this that nobody tells you. It's not about waking up at 5 a.m. The specific hour is irrelevant. What matters is the gap, the space between consciousness and consumption. Experienced practitioners of Zen meditation call this the golden window, that period where your mind hasn't yet been colonized by external noise, where your thoughts are actually your own. One military officer who spent 20 years studying peak performance put it this way: the first hour of your day is the rudder of the ship. Wherever it points, the rest follows. Most people let Twitter set the rudder. Sounds dramatic, right? But think about the last time you woke up and immediately saw something that annoyed you on your phone. A stupid comment. A depressing headline. A work email that set your teeth on edge. How did the rest of that day go? Exactly. Now, compare it to one of those rare mornings where you woke up naturally, sat in silence for a few minutes, maybe had coffee while staring out the window, thinking about nothing in particular. Those days feel different. They feel like yours. And that difference isn't psychological fluff. Brain imaging studies show that the default mode network, the part of your brain responsible for self-reflection and creative problem solving, is most active in the absence of external stimulation. You're literally smarter, more creative, and more emotionally stable when you protect that first window.
Who used to be incredibly patient. Have you ever watched someone who used to be incredibly patient, empathetic, and understanding suddenly flip a switch and become completely untouchable? Like one day they're bending over backwards for everyone around them, and the next they're walking away from people without a second glance? Well, if you've witnessed this transformation in a Sigma female, you're not alone. And here's the thing: this isn't just some random personality change or a bad mood that'll pass. No, this is something much deeper, much more permanent, and honestly, it's backed by some pretty fascinating psychology. Today, we're diving deep into the Sigma female's final shift, that moment when she crosses a line she can never uncross, when patience turns into boundaries made of steel, when kindness gets replaced by ruthless self preservation. And trust me, once you understand why this happens, you'll never look at personal transformation the same way again. So buckle up because we're about to explore the breaking point that changes everything. One, the buildup, years of invisible labor. Let's talk about what happens before the shift. Because this transformation doesn't happen overnight. No way. It's the result of accumulated experiences, disappointments, and betrayals that stack up like bricks in a wall. Female spends years, sometimes her entire life up to that point, being the person others lean on. She's the friend who listens to the same problems over and over without complaining. She's the partner who compromises her own needs to keep the peace. She's the daughter who carries emotional burdens that aren't even hers to carry. And here's the kicker: she does it willingly at first, because she genuinely cares. She wants to help. She believes in people's potential to grow and change. But what happens when that belief gets tested repeatedly? What happens when the same patterns keep showing up, when boundaries get crossed again and again, when respect becomes optional? Psychologists call this emotional labor, the invisible work of managing other people's feelings, maintaining relationships, and keeping the peace. And for the Sigma female, she's doing this labor without even getting paid, metaphorically speaking. She's been the emotional backbone for so many people, and Honestly, she's exhausted, but she doesn't show it. Not yet, anyway. She keeps going, keeps giving, keeps hoping that things will change. Until one day, something breaks inside her, and that's when everything shifts. Two, the breaking point, when enough is finally enough. So, what triggers the final shift? What's the straw that breaks the camel's back? For every Sigma female, it's different. Maybe it's a betrayal from someone she trusted completely. Maybe it's realizing that her has been taken for weakness one too many times. Maybe it's watching people who never put in half the effort she did somehow expect her continued support and energy. But here's what's consistent: it's never just one thing, it's the accumulation of everything. It's the friend who only calls when they need something, it's the family member who guilts her into situations that drain her, romantic partner who takes her loyalty for granted. It's the colleague who steals credit for her work. The breaking point arrives when the Sigma female finally sees the pattern clearly. And I mean crystal clear. All those isolated incidents suddenly connect like dots in a constellation, forming a picture she can no longer ignore. She realizes that her empathy has been exploited, her patience has been abused, her trust has been violated, and something inside her just clicks. From a psychological standpoint, this is called compassion fatigue, mixed with a healthy dose of self preservation instinct finally kicking in. Her brain, which has been suppressing her own needs for so long, suddenly says, "No, we're done here." The survival mechanism that's been dormant wakes up with a vengeance. Three, the psychological switch, understanding the brain science. Look at a bit scientific here, but I promise I'll keep it simple. When a Sigma female makes this shift, there's actual brain chemistry involved. Our brains have this thing called the threat detection system. Basically, it's designed to keep us safe. For years, the Sigma female's threat detection system has been picking up signals. People using her, disrespecting her boundaries, taking advantage of her nature. But her prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational thinking and empathy, has been overriding those signals. She's been telling herself, they didn't mean it. They're going through something. I should be more understanding. Sound familiar? But here's what happens over time. The emotional center of the brain, the amygdala, starts keeping score. Every slight, every disappointment, every boundary violation gets logged. And eventually, the data becomes overwhelming. The amygdala basically stages a coup against the prefrontal cortex and says, we're changing the protocol. Self preservation is now priority number one. This isn't being cold hearted or cruel. This is the brain doing exactly what it's designed to do: protect the organism. And once the switch flips, it's incredibly hard to flip it back. The Sigma female's brain has literally rewired itself to prioritize her well being over maintaining relationships that drain her. For the ruthlessness, what it actually looks like. Now, when we say the Sigma female becomes ruthless, what does that actually mean? Because it's not about being mean or vindictive. That's not her style. Instead, her ruthlessness manifests as crystal clear boundaries with zero flexibility. She stops explaining herself. She stops justifying her decisions. She stops feeling guilty for putting herself first. People who knew the old version of her are absolutely shocked. They can't believe she won't give them another chance. They can't understand why she's suddenly so cold. They'll say things like, "You've changed," or "I don't recognize you anymore." And you know what? They're right. She has changed. But here's what they don't get: this change isn't about them. It's about her finally valuing herself as much as she valued everyone else. Her ruthlessness looks like cutting off people without lengthy explanations or closure conversations, saying no without offering excuses or alternatives, leaving situations that no longer serve her, even if others are upset, refusing to engage in drama or manipulation tactics, setting actually enforcing them, choosing her peace over other people's comfort, walking away from opportunities if they come with strings attached. To outsiders, this might seem harsh, but to her, it's survival, it's self respect, it's the natural consequence of years of giving to people who only knew how to take. Five, the guilt phase and why IT doesn't last. Here's the thing. Even after the shift, there's usually a period where the Sigma female feels guilty. Yeah, you read that right. Despite everything, despite all the reasons she had to protect herself, part of her still feels bad. Why? Because she's been conditioned, like most women, honestly, to prioritize relationships and harmony over her own needs. Society teaches us that being a good person means being endlessly forgiving, always accessible, constantly accommodating. So when she first starts setting those ironclad boundaries, there's this nagging voice in her head saying, "Are you being too harsh? Maybe you should give them one more chance. What if you're overreacting?" But here's the beautiful thing. This guilt phase is temporary because every time she maintains her boundary and nothing terrible happens, in fact, when her life actually improves, that guilt loses its power. She realizes that the people who truly valued her will respect her boundaries. And the people who can't, well, they were never really in her corner to begin with. They were just comfortable with the version of her that made their lives easier. Psychologically, this is called cognitive restructuring. She's literally retraining her brain to recognize that self respect isn't selfish, that boundaries aren't mean, and that ruthless protection of her peace is actually the healthiest thing she's ever done. 6. The loneliness, confronting the empty spaces. Let's be real about something that doesn't get talked about enough. The shift comes with loneliness, at least at first. When the Sigma female starts cutting people off and enforcing boundaries, she often finds herself with way fewer relationships than before. Her social circle shrinks dramatically. Her phone stops buzzing as much. Weekends might feel quieter than they used to. And this can be scary, really scary, because humans are social creatures, right? We're wired for connection. So when you suddenly have less connection, even if those connections were toxic, there's a void. But here's where the Sigma female's unique psychology comes into play. Remember, she's never been someone who needs constant social validation. She's comfortable with solitude. She actually thrives in it. So while she might initially feel that loneliness, she quickly realizes something profound. Alone is better than drained. Solitude is better than constantly feeling disrespected. And gradually, that loneliness transforms into something else entirely: peace. Actual, genuine peace. The kind she hasn't felt in years, maybe ever. Plus, something magical happens when you clear out the toxic relationships. You suddenly have space, emotional space, mental space, time for better connections, for people who actually value what you bring to the table, for relationships based on mutual respect rather than one sided giving. 7. The power shift, reclaiming her energy. This is where things get really interesting. Because once the Sigma female has gone through the shift, once she's established her boundaries, once she's moved past the guilt and the loneliness, something incredible happens. She becomes powerful in a way she's never been before. All that energy she used to pour into maintaining relationships with people who didn't appreciate her, it's hers now. All that mental space she used to occupy worrying about other people's feelings, and available. All that emotional bandwidth she used to dedicate to managing everyone else's problems, redirected toward her own goals and dreams. The transformation is absolutely stunning. She starts accomplishing things she's been putting off for years. That business idea, she launches it. That degree she wanted, she goes back to school. That hobby she never had time for, part of her life. From a psychological perspective, this is about energy conservation and proper allocation. For years, she's been operating at a deficit, giving more than she had to give, running on empty. But now, she's finally running on a full tank, and the difference is night and day. People around her notice too. They see her thriving, see her glowing, see her living her best life. And honestly, some of them get even more bitter about her boundaries because they realize just how much of her energy they were consuming before. But she doesn't care anymore because she's tasted what it feels like to be free, and there's no going back from that. 8. The selectivity, choosing quality over quantity. After the shift, the Sigma female becomes incredibly selective about who gets access to her life.
The truth about underarms, they feel so neglected because our bodies get all the attention. So we created a deodorant.
Oh my gosh. That's embarrassing.
That might seem extreme to people who've never been through what she's been through. She's no longer interested in casual friendships that go nowhere. She doesn't have time for surface level conversations or performative relationships. She can spot fake people from a mile away, and she has zero interest in engaging with them. Instead, she focuses on quality. She'd rather have 2 solid friendships than 20 shallow ones. She'd rather be alone than in a relationship that requires her to dim her light. She'd rather work independently than on a team that doesn't value her contributions. This selectivity isn't snobbery, it's wisdom. She's learned the hard way that not everyone deserves a seat at her table, that her time and energy are finite resources, that she has every right to be picky about who she invests in. And the people who do make it through her filter, they're the lucky ones, because they get the best version of her, the version that's no longer exhausted from carrying everyone else's weight. They get her full presence, her loyalty, her support, but they also know that these gifts come with a responsibility to treat her with the same respect she shows them. The relationship dynamics she creates post-shift are so much healthier than anything she had before. They're based on equality, reciprocity, and genuine connection. And honestly, that's what she deserved all along. 9. The misconceptions, what people get wrong. Let's address some of the common misconceptions about this transformation because there are plenty. First, people assume that the Sigma female who becomes ruthless is bitter or angry. Not true. She might have been angry initially, rightfully so, but the ruthlessness that remains isn't fueled by bitterness. It's fueled by self-love. There's a huge difference. Second, some folks think she's given up on people or become cynical. Nope, she hasn't given up on people in general. She's given up on tolerating disrespect and accepting crumbs when she deserves the whole meal. That's not cynicism, that's having standards. Third, there's this idea that she's become hard or closed off, but that's not accurate either. She's not closed off to genuine connection. She just closed off to toxicity. Her heart is still capable of deep love and connection. More careful about who gets that access. Fourth, people sometimes think this shift means she has no empathy left. Wrong again. She still has empathy. She's just learned to extend it to herself first. She understands that you can't pour from an empty cup, and she's finally prioritizing keeping her own cup full. The truth is, the Sigma female's ruthlessness is one of the healthiest things she's ever done for herself. It's not a character flaw, it's character development. It's not a downgrade, it's an evolution. And anyone who can't see that probably doesn't deserve to be in her life anyway. 10. The irreversibility, why she won't go back. Here's something people need to understand. This shift is permanent. Once the Sigma female has gone through this transformation, she doesn't revert back to her old ways. Why? Because she can't unsee what she's seen. She can't unlearn what she's learned. It's like waking up from the Matrix. Once you know the truth, you can't just choose to forget it and go back to sleep. She's experienced firsthand what it feels like to prioritize herself. She knows what peace tastes like. She understands the value of her own energy and time. And she's realized that the world doesn't end when she says no or walks away from situations that don't serve her. People from her past sometimes try to come back. They reach out with apologies or explanations, hoping to get back into her life. And you know what she does? She wishes them well, but keeps the door closed because she remembers. She remembers how they made her feel. She remembers the patterns. And she's not interested in round 2. This isn't about holding grudges. It's about respecting the journey she's been on. She worked too hard to get to this place of peace and power. She's not going to jeopardize it by letting the same people back in to create the same problems. From a psychological standpoint, this is called protective behavioral patterns. Once the brain has learned that certain situations or people are threats to well-being, it creates strong aversion responses. And these responses are hard to override because they're designed to keep us safe. The Sigma female has finally learned to trust her instincts, to listen to her gut, to honor the lessons she's learned. And that makes her unstoppable. 11. The ripple effect, how it inspires others. Something beautiful happens when a Sigma female makes this shift. She inadvertently gives permission to others to do the same. When people see her setting boundaries and thriving, when they watch her walk away from toxic situations and still succeed, actually succeed even more, it plants a seed. Other women start thinking, wait, I could do that too? I can say no. I can put myself first. The Sigma female becomes a living example that you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. That self-respect is attractive, not selfish. That boundaries are necessary, not mean. She's not trying to be an inspiration or a role model. She's just living her life on her terms. But her authenticity and her strength have a way of impacting people around her, especially those who've been considering making similar changes but haven't found the courage yet. This is particularly powerful in environments where women are constantly taught to be accommodating and agreeable. Seeing another woman, especially a Sigma female who's naturally non-confrontational, stand firm in her boundaries is revolutionary. It challenges the narrative that being a good person means accepting poor treatment. The ripple effect extends beyond just inspiring individuals, too. It can change entire relationship dynamics, family systems, and workplace cultures. When one person starts refusing to participate in dysfunction, it forces everyone else to either step up or step aside. So here we are at the end of this deep dive into the Sigma female's final shift and the psychology behind her transformation into ruthlessness. The bottom line is this: when a Sigma female becomes ruthless, it's not a villainous arc, it's a healing arc. It's the natural consequence of years of giving to people who only knew how to take. It's her brain survival finally kicking in after being suppressed for too long. It's self-love disguised as coldness by people who benefited from her self-neglect. The shift happens when accumulated disappointments finally outweigh her natural inclination toward empathy and patience. And once it happens, it's irreversible. Not because she's become bitter or damaged, but because she's become wise. She's learned her worth, discovered her power, and decided that her peace is non-negotiable. This ruthlessness that people see, it's actually just self-respect with sharp edges. It's boundaries that are finally being enforced. It's standards that are no longer flexible. And honestly, it's one of the healthiest psychological transformations a person can go through. If you're a Sigma female who's gone through this shift, know that there's nothing wrong with you. You're not too harsh, too cold, or too demanding. You're simply no longer available for situations that compromise your well-being. And that's not just okay, that's powerful. And if you know a Sigma female who's gone through this transformation, understand that she didn't wake up one day and decide to be difficult. She woke up after years of being too accommodating and realized she deserved better. The best thing you can do is respect her boundaries, appreciate the access she does give you, and never take her presence for granted. Because here's the truth: a ruthless Sigma female is just a woman who finally learned to value herself as much as she valued everyone else. And that's not a tragedy, that's a triumph. Thanks for sticking with me through this entire exploration. If this resonated with you, if you've experienced this shift yourself or witnessed it in someone you know, remember, transformation isn't always comfortable, but it's almost always necessary. And sometimes becoming a little ruthless is the kindest thing you can do for yourself.
Running